What's up guys, Matthew here. Sean O'Malley put on a striking masterclass performance against Chito Vera at UFC 299. Let's take a closer look. Right out of the gate, O'Malley claims the center of the octagon and throws several feints, which played an important role in his game. For one, they make him much less predictable, which is important against someone like Chito, who likes to be patient, make his reads, and then look for knockout shots. Chito's fight with Dominick Cruz really demonstrated this. Cruz has some really dynamic footwork and lateral movement, but Chito noticed that when he's exiting out to the side, he leans really hard, probably to slip potential counterattacks. So Chito took advantage of this. In the fourth round, Cruz repeated this exact movement, and Chito timed a kick to intercept him as he was leaning out to the side. Even though Cruz has really great flow with his footwork, his movement pattern became predictable, and Chito capitalized on it. All of these feints that O'Malley threw made his attacks much less predictable, and they also created reactions that he was able to take advantage of, as we'll see later in the fight. O'Malley also combined stance switches with lateral movement very effectively. Oftentimes there isn't any rhyme or reason behind these stance switches, but they're simply to change up Chito's targets and make it more difficult for Chito to find windows to attack. When O'Malley is southpaw, Chito is probably thinking about his cross, his oblique kick, but when O'Malley suddenly takes a step to the outside and switches to orthodox, suddenly all of these attacks he might be thinking about get inverted. Now, O'Malley's jab might be more effective, the outside leg kick might be more effective, and then he jumps right back to southpaw. It's these constant stance switches that made O'Malley a puzzle and made Chito much more hesitant to unload on him. Here we see O'Malley throw a teep, and these body shots were also a big part of O'Malley's game plan. Chito is just hard to hit. He tucks his chin really well, and the way he shells up and swats at punches makes it even harder to find his chin. And even when he gets hurt, he's incredibly difficult to put away. And he's also well known to have a great gas tank. And this is why it was such a smart decision by O'Malley and his coach Tim Welch to invest in the body early on. Their goal was to constantly stab Chito in the gut with teeps and body shots and spinning back kicks to drain his gas tank. So by the time the fourth or fifth round arrived and he needed to really put the pressure on O'Malley to take those rounds or get a finish, he wouldn't have the energy or the willpower to do it. Here's another really great example of how the stance switches were so effective for O'Malley. Here we see O'Malley in the orthodox stance, then he switches to southpaw and really grounds his feet like he's ready to unload a cross. They're in the open stance here, so Chito is probably much less worried about O'Malley's jab because his own lead hand is on the same side and they interfere with each other. So he's much more worried about that left hand. And when O'Malley drives off that back foot, Chito swats at the air like he's defending that cross. And this leaves his midsection open for O'Malley to slam that body kick. O'Malley is really great at floating and being really light on his toes to be really twitchy with how he throws these feints, and then suddenly grounding his feet when he's actually generating power with his real attacks. This here is one of O'Malley's signature attacks. He's orthodox and Chito is southpaw, so they're in the open stance, and we can see their lead hands are on the same side. They're both fighting over control of the space between them. Then we can see O'Malley back out slightly to create a little more space and sort of swat at Chito's lead hand. But this is only a distraction because it baits Chito in. And this is where O'Malley's ability to go from light and floaty to grounded and explosive pays off, because he's able to really quickly ground his feet and land his cross while Chito is distracted by the hand fighting. The feints from O'Malley also give him clues as to how Chito reacts when he thinks O'Malley is launching an attack. And there's really two things that he does. The first thing he does is swat, to parry them like we see here. And the other thing he does is hunker down as we see here, where he's tucking his chin and really shelling up with a high guard. Making these reads early on was really important for O'Malley to set up his big shots later in the fight. This here is another example of how using the feints was so effective for setting up his body shots. O'Malley feints two jabs and Chito does two things. He swats at the jab and he raises his guard up on the right side to defend a follow-up right hand. But this leaves a big opening on the body, so O'Malley does it again. Feints the jab, Chito defends like a 1-2 is coming, and he punishes him for it by stabbing that opening on the body. Chito never adjusted to this, so he goes right back to the same play. Double feint the jab, Chito swats and raises his guard, revealing that opening on the body, and O'Malley once again targets this weakness. This right here foreshadows the biggest shot O'Malley landed in this fight. It's just like the sequence we looked at earlier, where they're in an open stance, and O'Malley reaches out with his lead hand to bait Chito in for a hand fight. Once Chito realizes it's bait, he goes back to his tendency to hunker down, expecting a follow-up shot. O'Malley throws a body kick here, but we'll see later how he mixes in knees to punish him even more. By the end of round 1, we can see a lot of redness on Chito's side, which shows just how much damage O'Malley was doing to his body. Here in round 2, when we look at the difference in O'Malley and Chito's movement, we can see why one was so much more successful than the other. O'Malley is switching stances. He's moving laterally and feinting. Meanwhile, Chito is just standing in the same spot, very flat-footed, and just pivoting back and forth to face O'Malley. While this moment didn't amount to anything, it was very indicative of O'Malley's success and Chito's failure in this fight. This moment right here was a huge tell that set up that crushing knee up the middle. O'Malley gives a slight feint, and Chito swats at it and raises his guard to defend what he thinks is a 1-2. He then realizes it was a feint and hunkers down to brace for the follow-up shot, leaving a huge opening up the middle. O'Malley flashes the knee but doesn't fully commit to it, but at least now he knows that opening is there. Fast forward 1 minute and it's the exact same sequence. He gives a slight feint, knowing that Chito is going to hunker down, except this time he fully commits to the knee up the middle, and to be quite honest, I don't know how this didn't knock Chito down. This for sure broke bones in his face. I mean, it sounded like someone hit him with a baseball bat. It just goes to show how tough Chito is, because this would probably have knocked out almost any other bantamweight on the roster. O'Malley definitely smells blood in the water, but according to him, he had a sense that Chito wasn't as hurt as we may have thought he was. So he didn't overcommit to get a finish here. If he emptied the gas tank and didn't finish him, it's only the second round, so he'd need to fight potentially 15 more minutes with someone who was much more reserved in the first 10. So a really smart move by O'Malley to put the pressure on, but to know when to let up and save his energy. Watch how beautiful this pull counter is at the end of this round. Both guys trade jabs, so O'Malley knows he's in range, and it's really subtle, but he slightly leans forward so his head is hanging over his lead foot, which gives Chito the illusion that he's in range to go in for another jab, but because O'Malley is leaning forward, he has some slack to pull his head out of range at the last second, and now Chito is fully extended and O'Malley counters. Near the start of round 3, we can see yet again how O'Malley used variety in his attacks to remain unpredictable. He does a little double feint with his head, and based on what he's been doing so far in this fight, what should Chito be expecting? Probably a body shot. Well, instead of going to the body, he goes up top and lands right down the middle. But he doesn't just stop here. When O'Malley throws his 2, he doesn't keep his feet planted and just rotate his hips like in a traditional boxing stance, but instead he really commits all the way through to the point where he's almost facing away. And this is something that he needs to be careful about, because if his opponent slips this cross, there are a lot of openings on this side of his body. But usually O'Malley is good at landing this shot in the first place, and he's also good at exiting out to the side. But here, because he's comfortable in both stances, he just switches stances, and this creates a really great angle for a body shot or a cross. And Chito is still stunned from the first shot he landed, so he's looking down and facing away from O'Malley. So just by taking a small sidestep and switching stances, he created a really favorable position for landing another attack. He didn't really capitalize on it here, but he set himself up really well with his footwork. I love this little combination from O'Malley. He feints a cross and halfway commits to it, and it looks very similar to the combination we saw just a moment ago, where he steps all the way through into the opposite stance. And again, we see Chito swatting with one hand and shelling up with the other. I like how O'Malley does a little level change and moves his head off the center line. This is good practice for moving his target to make it more difficult for Chito to land a counter. This reminds me of Demetrius Johnson's knockout of Adriano Moraes. We see him feint, then dip and move his head off the center line, which slipped the counter from Moraes. Johnson ended up going up top, but for O'Malley it was more effective to go to the body again. Going into round 4, Chito was down 3 rounds, so O'Malley and his team were probably expecting Chito to come out with a little more urgency. And this is really where O'Malley pacing himself in the early rounds and not chasing that finish after the big knee in round 2 are really going to pay off. Chito lands a pretty good jab, one of his best shots in this entire fight honestly, but O'Malley does a great job of moving his head off the center line, which allows him to slip that follow-up cross. What he also does well is circling out and taking the center of the octagon again. This shifts the momentum here and allows him to reset. Here O'Malley and Chito are in the opposite stance, and we see this hand fighting with their lead hands to control the space between them. When O'Malley feints the cross, Chito looks to parry it, but way overextends himself. And now he knows he's really out of position, and O'Malley has a great angle to land a cross or an overhand. So he extends this arm out to try and keep O'Malley at bay. But instead of attempting to land a cross, O'Malley waits for him to try and reset back to a better position and lands a beautiful jab while he's squared up. At this point it sounds like a broken record, but all of the body shots and feints paid off tremendously by this point in the fight, because Chito had such a hard time reading him when he was setting up his attacks. Here's an example. O'Malley gives a little feint, just dropping his level a little bit, and Chito brings his elbows in and tightens his core like he's bracing for a body shot. He does it again, except this time flashes the 2, and Chito has the exact same response. So now he knows that throwing the cross will probably land if he goes up top, because Chito thinks it's going to the body. So that's exactly what he does. He gives a little jab feint and lands that cross right between Chito's guard. And he does it again just seconds later. He threw so many feints throughout this fight that Chito almost became numb to it. When O'Malley's loading up to throw that cross, Chito has no idea if it's going to the body or the head. It's more or less a coin toss for him because he knows O'Malley is typically a headhunter, but he's also been targeting the body so much throughout this fight. And we see here that he thought it was aimed at his head, but it was actually aimed at his body. So now what does O'Malley do after he resets? He takes a little step to the outside, and this time goes up top. O'Malley was absolutely relentless in this fight with how many different looks he threw at Chito. Here in round 5, O'Malley switches to orthodox, so now they're in an open stance, and he's had so much success with the hand fighting and finding his cross throughout the fight so far. And Chito knows this, and we can see him switch to go back to a closed stance. But in the middle of the stance switch, where his hips are squared up, he's much less mobile, so this is a brief moment of vulnerability. And O'Malley times an absolute piston of a cross that really hurts Chito. This wasn't as flashy as the knee from round 2, but Chito's body language over the next minute suggests that he was probably even more hurt from this shot than the knee. O'Malley still reserved himself and didn't empty the tank, knowing that if Chito survived, he'd still have to fight for another 4 minutes. This really shows how composed and cerebral O'Malley was. In the last minute of this fight, Chito tried to really empty the tank, but unfortunately it was too little too late, and O'Malley got the win. This fight made no sense honestly and should never have happened. I think Corey Sandhagen should have been his opponent, and really the only reason this fight happened was because of the history between these two guys. Obviously, Chito's win over O'Malley was a legitimate win. It was an injury caused by his low calf kick. We've seen it happen with other fighters before, and it just seems to be one of those fluky things. Clearly, Sean proved in this fight that he has dimensions to his game that Chito doesn't even come close to, but Chito still showed incredible toughness and heart because most fighters wouldn't have been able to withstand that beating for 25 minutes. Thanks for watching.